The scent of polished mahogany and stale ambition hung heavy in the air of the executive boardroom. It was a smell I knew intimately, one that had clung to my skin for decades. At 59, Beth Hayes, was not just a name, I was a brand. Founder and CEO of Apex Solutions, a global software conglomerate that had clawed its way from a garage startup to a Silicon Valley behemoth under my unwavering hand. They called me a titan of industry, a visionary, even the Iron Lady of tech. My strategic genius was legendary. My resolve, they said, was unbreakable. And tonight I was about to find out just how fragile even the most formidable empire could be. The meeting had been called by James, my son, a fact that, even now, twisted a knot in my stomach. He'd sent out the calendar invite himself, bypassing my executive assistant, a subtle power play that hadn't gone unnoticed. Urgent board discussion, strategic future, the subject line read, vague yet ominous. It was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, an hour when most executives were either heading home or on their second martini, but James knew I never truly clocked out. I walked into the room, my tailored suit jacket crisp, my posture ramrod straight. I wasn't just Beth, the mother, I was Beth, the CEO. And in this room, even my son knew that distinction. 6 of my most senior directors were already seated around the gleaming oval table. There was Robert Chen, my COO, solid and dependable, his expression a careful blank. Next to him, Dr. Anya Gupta, head of R&D, her brilliant mind hidden behind a perpetually calm demeanor. Across from them, Michael Rodriguez, the stoic CFO, whose numbers never lied, and Sarah Kim, head of global sales, sharp as a tack, her usual vibrant energy muted tonight. Then there were the other two. David Miller, my chief legal officer, a man whose loyalty I had always taken for granted, his eyes unusually shifty tonight. And next to him, Thomas Davies, head of operations, a former protege of mine, whose ambition sometimes outpaced his judgment. A prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. The air was too quiet. The smiles were too forced. James sat at the head of the table, in my chair, a subtle transgression that spoke volumes. He looked every inch the ambitious executive, sharp suit, perfectly coiffed hair, a confident, almost arrogant glint in his eyes. He was brilliant, no doubt, ambitious, certainly, but sometimes his brilliance overshadowed his wisdom, and his ambition, I feared, eclipsed his judgment. He yearned to step into my shoes, a yearning that had grown from a quiet hum to a deafening roar over the past few years. He genuinely believed his modern vision was being stifled by my old guard approach. He saw my experience as an anchor, not a rudder. Mother, James began, his voice smooth, confident, utterly devoid of filial warmth in this setting. Thank you for joining us. I believe this meeting is long overdue. I settled into the chair to his right, the CEO's usual seat, a deliberate, if unspoken, shift of power. I merely inclined my head, my expression unreadable. Cut to the chase, James. What's so urgent it couldn't wait for our scheduled quarterly board meeting next week? My voice was calm, a low, authoritative purr that had quelled many a corporate crisis. James smiled, a practiced, almost pitying expression. Of course, no need for pleasantries when the future of Apex is at stake. He glanced around the table, making eye contact with each director, lingering slightly on Miller and Davies. My unease sharpened. Ladies and gentlemen, James continued, his voice swelling with practiced gravitas. For years, my mother, Beth Hayes, has guided Apex with an iron will and unparalleled vision. She built this company from nothing, and we are all indebted to her. He paused, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I detected a genuine note of respect. I was wrong. However, he pressed on, his gaze now fixed squarely on me, the landscape of technology is evolving at an unprecedented pace. We need agility. We need fresh perspectives. We need a leader who can navigate the next decade, not one who is anchored to the past. My jaw tightened imperceptibly. This wasn't about strategy. This was personal. This was a challenge, and it was publicly orchestrated. Mother, James continued, his voice softening, a saccharine sweetness that made my stomach churn. You've given your life to Apex. You deserve to enjoy the fruits of your labor, to step back, relax, and enjoy your golden years. He leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Therefore, I've called this meeting to present a motion for your immediate retirement, effective tonight, and the immediate transition of power to myself as the new CEO. The words hung in the air, cold and calculated, hitting me with the force of a physical blow, a public motion for my forced retirement. By my own son, the audacity, the sheer breathtaking arrogance. He wasn't just asking, he was demanding, right here, right now, in front of the very people I had groomed, guided, and trusted. A wave of shock rippled around the table. Robert Chen looked visibly uncomfortable. Anya Gupta's calm demeanor seemed to crack slightly. Michael Rodriguez's hand twitched, reaching for his water glass. Sarah Kim's eyes, usually so keen, were wide with disbelief. But Miller and Davies, their expressions were different. Miller offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod to James. Davies, meanwhile, sat with a smug, almost triumphant look on his face, avoiding my gaze. The pieces clicked into place, cold and sharp. This wasn't a sudden burst of youthful ambition. This was a coup, planned, orchestrated, and James had co-conspirators. The serpent was in the boardroom, and it wasn't alone. James, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the shocked silence like a laser. Are you seriously doing this? Now? Here? It's for the good of the company, Mother, he replied, his voice firm, resolute. He truly believed it, in his misguided, power-hungry way. Or perhaps he was just a fool. Directors, he announced, turning to the table, ignoring my question. We need to put this to a vote, all in favor of Beth Hayes's immediate retirement and my ascension to CEO? Miller's hand shot up immediately, his face unblinking. Then Davies, his arm a little slower, but his vote just as clear. 2. 2 out of 6. My heart ached, a sharp, bitter pang of betrayal, not just from James, but from men I had mentored, trusted, elevated. My gaze swept across the remaining 4. Chen, Gupta, Rodriguez, Kim. Their faces were a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, dismay, regret. They knew this was wrong. They knew this was a betrayal. But the unspoken pressure, the threat of siding against the future CEO, hung heavy in the air. James's confident smile widened. He saw 2 votes as a beginning, a crack in my foundation. He fully expected the others to fall in line, one by one. The momentum was with him. The element of surprise, the public nature of the demand. It was all designed to break me, to force my hand, to make me concede in front of my own people. He waited, his eyes gleaming, expecting me to fight, to rage, to protest. He expected the legendary Iron Lady to unleash her fury, to defend her throne. He expected a protracted, messy battle, a corporate civil war, but I had built this empire on more than just fury. I had built it on strategy, on foresight, on understanding my opponents, even when that opponent was my own flesh and blood. And in that moment, looking at James's smug, overconfident face and the nervous guilt in the eyes of Miller and Davies, a different kind of plan began to form in my mind, a far more subtle and far more devastating counterattack. I fixed my gaze on James, a flicker of something unreadable in my eyes, perhaps amusement, perhaps a cold pity. He wanted control, he wanted to lead. Very well, let him. With a calm, deliberate movement, I leaned back in my chair. My voice, when I spoke, was steady, clear, utterly devoid of emotion. "Very well, James," I said, nodding slowly. "You have my agreement. I accept your motion. I will retire." The silence in the room was absolute. James's triumphant smile froze on his face, replaced by a look of utter, bewildered shock. The other directors stared, utterly stunned. This wasn't the fight they expected. This wasn't the Beth Hayes they knew. They expected a queen to rage against a usurper. Instead, they got a quiet, unnerving abdication. "Effective tonight?" James stammered, clearly thrown off balance. "Effective tonight," I confirmed, rising from the table with unhurried grace. I met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not defeat, but a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. A calm, chilling confidence. "The company is yours, James. Let it well." And with that, I turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the stunned silence, the confused directors, and my ambitious son, sitting in my chair, holding the reins of an empire he thought he had won. But the game, I knew, had only just begun, and James, in his rush for power, had no idea he was now holding not a scepter, but a ticking time bomb. The scent of polished mahogany and stale ambition still hung heavy in the air, but now a new acrid tang joined it, the metallic tang of betrayal. I, Beth Hayes, at 59, had just agreed to my forced retirement, proposed by my own son James in an unscheduled, illegitimate board meeting. The words, "effective tonight," still echoed in the sudden, stunned silence of the boardroom. James's triumphant smile, initially frozen in disbelief at my quiet capitulation, slowly melted into an expression of wary victory. He had expected a fight. He had expected the legendary Iron Lady of Tech to unleash a storm of fury, to rally her loyalists, to tear down his carefully constructed coup brick by painstaking brick. Instead, I had simply nodded, agreed, and walked out, leaving him in my chair at the head of my table with a hollow victory in his hand. The walk from the boardroom to my private executive suite felt miles long. Each step was deliberate, measured, betraying none of the turmoil churning within me. My staff, ever discreet, seemed to sense the shift in the corporate atmosphere. Heads dipped slightly as I passed. Hushed whispers followed in my wake. They knew something momentous had just occurred. They just didn't know what. Once inside my office, I closed the heavy oak door, the click resonating like a final pronouncement. I stood for a moment, my back to the door, hands clasped behind me, staring out at the glittering tapestry of the Manhattan skyline. Apex Solutions headquarters, a gleaming monument to my life's work, rose like a titan amidst the smaller buildings. From this vantage point, the city looked like a complex circuit board, every light a tiny neuron firing. And tonight, a vital circuit had been deliberately, brutally cut. The betrayal. Oh, the betrayal. It wasn't just James. That was a bitter pill, yes, but one I had, in my darkest moments, perhaps even anticipated. His ambition had always been a voracious beast, and I had, perhaps unwisely, fed it. I had seen the glint in his eye, the impatience in his posture whenever I spoke of long-term vision instead of immediate disruption. He genuinely believed his modern vision was being stifled by my old guard approach. He saw my experience as an anchor, not a rudder. He wanted the helm, and he wanted it now. Unbeknownst to me, James, fueled by this impatience and a thirst for power, had begun quietly lobbying board members, convinced he was ready to take the reins. But Miller, David Miller, my chief legal officer, and Thomas Davies, head of operations, a man I had personally brought up through the ranks, taught, mentored. Their swift defection, their immediate siding with James, felt like a poisoned dagger twisting in my gut. These weren't just executives, they were confidants, or so I believed. Miller, always so methodical, so scrupulously legalistic. Davies, charismatic, sharp, always eager to please, a trait I had mistaken for loyalty. They had been part of the conspiracy, the serpent in the boardroom James had brought in. That was the profound shock, the truly disorienting blow. My strategic genius had always been in predicting market shifts, anticipating competitors, but I had missed the rot within my own ranks. I walked to my desk, its surface gleaming under the soft lamplight. My hand hovered over the familiar keyboard, the one I had used to draft countless strategies, sign off on billions in deals, shape the very trajectory of the tech world. Now it felt foreign. My mind, however, was already racing. It wasn't about anger anymore. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was about calculation, about strategy. James had underestimated me. He had expected a public spectacle, a drawn-out corporate civil war. He expected me to fight tooth and nail for a throne he believed was rightfully his, and in his youthful arrogance, he had entirely missed the subtle art of war. My calm nod, my immediate agreement to step down, had unnerved him. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of confusion, the dawning realization that my surrender wasn't a defeat, but something else entirely, something he couldn't quite decipher. And the dissenting directors, Chen, Gupta, Rodriguez, Kim, their relief mingled with a profound sense of bewilderment. They knew I wasn't just going to disappear. They knew Beth Hayes didn't simply walk away. I sat down, my fingers already flying across the keyboard, typing a quick-coded message to Robert Chen. He was my COO, solid and dependable, his expression a careful blank during the meeting. But I knew Robert. He was loyal, principled. He valued integrity above all else. His silence tonight was not agreement. It was strategic. He was waiting for my signal. My fingers flew. Robert, urgent. Meet me at the lakeside cabin, 0600. No phones, no paper, no electronic footprint. You know what this is about. Hit send. Encrypted, untraceable. Next, Anya Gupta, head of R&D. Brilliant, meticulous, utterly devoted to Apex's innovation. Anya, drop everything. Need you at the cabin. 0600. Same protocol. Trust no one. Then Michael Rodriguez, the stoic CFO. His numbers never lied, and he was the one who could sniff out financial irregularities from a mile away. Michael, cabin, 600, critical financial review, bring everything. And finally, Sarah Kim, head of global sales. Sharp as a tack, incredibly intuitive, with a vast network of contacts that stretched across continents. Sarah, cabin, 600. Prepare for unforeseen market shifts. Keep your ear to the ground. 4 out of 6 directors, my core. The ones who had hesitated, whose faces had shown clear dismay at James's coup. They were my loyalists, not out of blind allegiance, but out of a shared vision for Apex, a belief in the principles upon which I had built it, and they understood my language. No phones, no paper, no electronic footprint. It meant a crisis. It meant a counteroffensive. My immediate retirement was not a surrender. It was a tactical retreat, a strategic disengagement. James wanted control. Let him have it. He wanted to sit in my chair. Let him. He wanted the spotlight. He could have it. But what he didn't realize was that he was holding the reins of an empty chariot while the true engine of Apex Solutions was already shifting gears, operating in the shadows. I leaned back in my chair, the cold fury that had sparked my decision now morphing into a calculated resolve. James, in his rush for power, had revealed his hand. He had shown his impatience, his disregard for process, his willingness to stab me in the back, and in doing so, he had exposed his own weaknesses. He was brilliant, yes, but he lacked my foresight, my understanding of true loyalty, my ability to play the long game. He understood the algorithm of disruption, but not the algorithm of human nature. And Miller and Davies, the two snakes, they had sided with James not because they believed in his dynamic leadership, but because they saw an opportunity. My gut, honed by decades of corporate warfare, screamed corruption. Their shifty eyes, their forced smiles, it all made sense now. They had been working with James, pushing him, perhaps even manipulating his ambition, to create chaos. Chaos, as I well knew, was the perfect smokescreen for illicit activities. They thought they were aligning with the rising sun. They were merely aligning with an unseasoned leader they could exploit. My retirement would give them free rein. They would assume I was broken, defeated, sent off to tend my roses. They would drop their guard. And that, I knew, was my greatest weapon. I closed my laptop, the screen going dark. The light in my office clicked off. I walked out, leaving the empty suite behind. No lingering, no packing boxes, no sentimental farewells. This wasn't an ending. It was just the end of the beginning. As I drove out of the corporate campus, the familiar gates gliding open for me, I glanced back at the gleaming apex tower. It stood tall, defiant against the night sky. James was likely still in the boardroom, basking in his hollow victory, perhaps already issuing his first directives. He might even be planning his first grand public statement, announcing his new era. Let him. Let him enjoy his delusion. I knew the true battle wouldn't be fought in boardrooms or on balance sheets, not yet. It would be fought in the shadows, with quiet conversations, with forensic accounting, and with the unwavering loyalty of the few I still trusted. James had usurped my throne, but he hadn't stolen my crown. That I still wore. And tomorrow I would begin to reclaim my kingdom. The game, as I knew it, was far from over. It had simply moved to a different, more dangerous playing field. And James, in his rush for power, had no idea he was now holding not a scepter, but a ticking time bomb. The morning after my retirement dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the storm I had unleashed. I didn't set an alarm. For the first time in over 30 years, the relentless hum of the stock market, the urgent ping of emails, the relentless demands of a global conglomerate were not my immediate concern. I woke to the gentle chirping of sparrows outside my window, a sound I hadn't truly heard in decades. My lakeside cabin, tucked away in the serene quiet of upstate New York, felt like a sanctuary. It was where I came to truly breathe, away from the concrete jungle and the corporate sharks. Today, it felt like a command center. I pulled on a comfortable cashmere sweater and worn jeans, a far cry from the power suits that were my daily uniform. I made myself a simple breakfast, fresh fruit, artisanal coffee, and carried it out to the sun-drenched patio overlooking the lake. The air was cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. I spent the early hours tending my roses. Each thorny stem, each delicate petal, demanded patience and meticulous care. It was a meditative practice, a stark counterpoint to the high-stakes world of mergers and acquisitions. As my fingers, usually flying across a keyboard, carefully pruned a withered bloom. My mind, however, was anything but idle. I imagined James strutting into Apex headquarters, his first morning as CEO. He'd be brimming with self-importance, eager to consolidate his power, to finally leave his mark. My phone, a burner tucked away in a locked drawer, vibrated subtly. It was Robert Chen. "Good morning, Beth." His voice was calm, but I could hear the subtle hum of suppressed excitement. "We're all here, Ready when you are. Excellent, Robert, I replied, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. Give them 15 minutes to settle in, then we begin. My retirement was going to be anything but. Meanwhile, I imagined the scene unfolding at Apex. James would have arrived early, probably before dawn, eager to savor his triumph. He'd likely sweep through the executive floor, expecting a parade of congratulatory handshakes, a bowing of heads. He would call his first executive meeting a symbolic transfer of power. He'd expect a full table. He'd expect obeisance. And then, the moment of his rude awakening, he'd walk into the boardroom, my chair still ominously empty at the head of the table. He'd be brimming with his new directives, his modern vision. He'd look around, expecting to see all 6 key directors ready to pledge their fealty, but only 2 would be there. Miller, Davies, the 2 snakes. They'd be there, no doubt, eager to curry favor, their faces alight with anticipation of their new unhindered access to the company's coffers. They'd probably offer a fawning welcome, a toast to the new era. Then James would look around again. Chen, Gupta, Rodriguez, Kim, missing, conspicuously, unequivocally absent. A knot would begin to form in James's gut. Confusion first, then annoyance. He'd probably check his phone, assume a scheduling error, a miscommunication. He'd call their offices, their assistants. No answer. Out of office, unavailable, on personal leave, evasive yet polite. My people were well trained. The fury would begin to simmer. He'd turn to Miller and Davies, their faces mirroring his confusion, though I suspected theirs was well practiced. "Where are they?" he'd demand, his voice laced with the impatience he so rarely bothered to hide from me. Miller would shrug, feigning ignorance. Davies would offer some vague excuse about last-minute travel. Then the first truly unsettling discovery would begin to chip away at James's triumphant facade. He'd try to access critical files, key decision-making platforms. Access denied? He'd call the IT department, fuming. Who has the authority for this? The IT manager, loyal to the core, would politely inform him those certain high-level permissions, those concerning critical financial approvals, major mergers, and strategic partnerships, were still routed through a specific, secure protocol, a protocol requiring the digital signatures of the 4 absent directors. And mine? Then would come the true gut-wrenching blow. He'd discover that a crucial merger vote, one he believed was stalled, had quietly gone through. A major funding round for a new R&D initiative, one he wanted to reevaluate, was already approved and disbursed. Documents, sensitive and legally binding, bearing the familiar digital signatures of Robert Chen, Anya Gupta, Michael Rodriguez, and Sarah Kim, were flowing through the system, and each one, just for good measure, would require a final encrypted stamp that could only be activated by my biometric data. He'd realized the shocking truth. My retirement was a masterstroke of tactical deception. I hadn't retired. I had masterfully orchestrated a shadow board, a parallel power structure, a loyal, discreet council operating entirely outside his immediate purview. He was in charge of a hollowed-out shell, a grand title with no real authority, no access to the company's true engine. He was the puppet king, but I was the puppet master, pulling the strings from the quiet solitude of my lakeside cabin. The rage would ignite then, a slow-burning fuse that had finally reached its explosive end. Passive-aggressive retaliation? Silent defiance? This was war, and he, James, had no idea how to fight a ghost. He would vow to prove he didn't need them. He'd storm into his office, slamming the door, his mind racing with a desperate need to assert his authority. He'd pull up the corporate org chart, circle the names of the absent four, and mentally erase them. Fine, he'd mutter. If they don't want to play ball, I'll play my own game. His first rash decision would be swift and brutal, perhaps firing a key department head loyal to Chen, or canceling a major R&D project that Gupta had poured years into, purely out of spite. He'd announce a radical new strategy, one entirely unvetted, untested, and frankly idiotic. He'd try to force a new chain of command, one that excluded my loyalists, not realizing their functions were seamlessly being handled outside his control. The result would be immediate chaos. Orders would contradict each other, projects would stall. Key personnel, confused and demoralized, would start whispering, then openly questioning his leadership. Investors, already nervous after the unexpected CEO change, would see the instability and begin pulling back. The carefully constructed edifice of Apex, my life's work, would begin to show cracks under James's inexperienced, volatile hand. And I, Beth, would watch it all unfold from my tranquil lakeside retreat, a half smile playing on my lips. The morning sun warmed my face as I sipped my coffee. Robert, Anya, Michael, and Sarah had arrived punctually, their faces betraying their exhaustion, but also a profound sense of purpose. We gathered around my rustic wooden table, laptops open, encrypted satellite phones on standby. This was the true board meeting. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice calm, commanding. "Let's review the status." Robert, ever efficient, began. James has, as expected, tried to access the Phase 3 funding for Project Chimera. Denied. The approval and disbursement went through our parallel system this morning. Anya's team has the green light to proceed. Anya, her eyes bright despite the dark circles under them, nodded. "Excellent. We're already initiating the next stage of trials." James tried to pull the plug on the quantum computing project, citing redundancy. Fortunately, its entire budget and team report directly to me via our secure network. He can't touch it. Michael grimaced. He's already made some disastrous calls on the market, tried to liquidate a major bond portfolio for quick cash, completely misjudging the current volatility. Fortunately, the four of us have joint signatories on all major financial instruments, and we've blocked it. But he's causing major ripples. "And sales?" I asked Sarah. "Chaotic," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "He's issued a directive for an aggressive, unsustainable sales push, demanding a 30% increase this quarter regardless of market conditions. My regional managers are confused. They're reporting serious morale issues. Customers are already asking questions." "Excellent," I said again, a faint smile touching my lips. Not because I reveled in the chaos, but because it confirmed my suspicions. James was burning through his capital of goodwill and corporate stability at an alarming rate. "And Miller and Davies?" I asked, my voice hardening. Robert cleared his throat. "They're his only active advisors. They're echoing his directives, pushing his agenda. They seem to be enjoying their newfound influence." "Indeed," I said, my eyes narrowing. "And how much of our third quarter projected revenue has been routed through their departments, Michael?" Michael's jaw tightened. "My initial audit of their departmental spending, accessed through our secure financial backdoors, suggests significant irregularities, particularly in vendor contracts and consultancy fees. It's sophisticated, very well hidden, but it's there. My conservative estimate is in the tens of millions already." Anya gasped. Robert cursed under his breath. Sarah's face paled. My suspicions were confirmed. My retirement wasn't just a strategic retreat, it was an elaborate trap. Miller and Davies weren't just supporting James. They were exploiting him. They saw his ambition, his inexperience, his blind desire for power as the perfect cover for their own avarice. They were systematically bleeding Apex dry, betting that in the ensuing chaos of James's leadership, their corruption would go unnoticed. All right, I said, pushing back from the table. Here's the new strategy. We let James continue to lead. We let the chaos escalate. We give Miller and Davies enough rope to hang themselves, but we quietly, meticulously gather every shred of evidence of their embezzlement. Michael, that's your priority. Sarah, keep the vital client relationships stable, but prepare for major market shifts. Anya, accelerate your key projects. Make them indispensable. Robert, maintain the shadow board. Ensure Apex's core functions remain secure and operational. We shield the company from James's follies and Miller and Davies's corruption. They looked at me, weary but resolute. And James? Robert asked. James, I said, gazing out at the serene lake. James will eventually realize he's built a house of cards, and when it collapses, he'll come running back. And that, I concluded, turning back to my loyal few, my expression cold and unwavering, is when we expose the truth, all of it. The game was on. The puppet master was pulling the strings, and the puppets, both the unwitting and the malicious, were dancing to my tune. James thought he had seized control. He had no idea he was merely an unwitting participant in my grand design, a design to save my empire and perhaps, finally, teach my son the true meaning of leadership. The Silicon Valley boardroom had become my chessboard, and the stakes had never been higher. The sweet scent of my blooming roses and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore were my constant companions. It had been just over a week since my retirement, and the tranquility of the lakeside cabin was a stark, delightful contrast to the relentless chaos I knew was unfolding back at Apex. My mornings were spent in the garden, my afternoons with a good book, and my evenings observing the stars. Yet, beneath this veneer of serene domesticity, my mind remained a finely tuned instrument, receiving daily reports from my loyal four. Robert, Anya, Michael, and Sarah were operating with quiet efficiency, executing the shadow board's directives. They confirmed my grim predictions. James, true to his impulsive nature, was indeed plunging Apex into freefall. His initial rash decisions had metastasized into systemic blunders. He'd canceled critical long-term R&D projects in favor of flashy, untested short-term initiatives designed for quick wins, projects he believed would make him look like a visionary. This crippled Anya's team, causing a brain drain as top scientists, loyal to the vision I had cultivated, quietly began to update their resumes. He'd also pushed an aggressive, unsustainable sales model, demanding impossible quotas that alienated long-standing clients and demoralized Sarah's entire global sales force. The carefully nurtured client relationships, built on years of trust, began to fray. Michael's reports were particularly damning. Revenue forecasts plummeted, not just projected, but actual tangible losses appearing on the balance sheets. Investor confidence, always a fickle beast in the tech world, evaporated faster than morning dew. I watched the stock ticker on a discrete monitor in my study, its red descent a testament to James's disastrous reign. It hurt to see my life's work bleeding out, but it was a necessary part of the cure. Miller and Davies, meanwhile, were enjoying their unfettered access. Michael's discreet forensic audit, conducted entirely off-grid and under extreme secrecy, was meticulously documenting their activities. Beth, he'd reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. They're like rats in the larder. It's not just a few million. It's deep, systemic. They've been siphoning funds through shell corporations, inflated vendor contracts, offshore accounts. It's brazen. Keep going, Michael, I'd instructed, my voice calm despite the churning in my stomach. Every dime, every transfer, we need irrefutable proof. I knew it wouldn't be long. James, for all his arrogance, wasn't foolish. He would see the numbers. He would feel the ground crumbling beneath him. The pressure from the board, from the institutional investors, would become unbearable. He would realize his modern vision was rapidly bankrupting the very company he coveted. Then the doorbell chimed, a sharp, insistent ring that cut through the afternoon quiet. My housekeeper, Martha, a woman whose loyalty was to me, not to corporate hierarchy, came to the study. "It's James, ma'am. He looks agitated." Agitated. An understatement, I imagined. I rose, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Show him in, Martha, and please make us some iced tea, sweetened for him, unsweetened for me." Martha, accustomed to my subtle cues, nodded, her eyes twinkling. James stormed into the study, his face contorted. The impeccably tailored suit of a week ago was rumpled, his hair disheveled. His eyes, usually gleaming with ambition, were bloodshot, frantic. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, a captain watching his ship sink in slow motion. He saw me, seated calmly by the window, a book in my lap, a vase of freshly cut roses filling the air with their delicate fragrance. The stark contrast between his disarray and my serene composure seemed to ignite his fury further. "Mother, what in God's name have you done?" he exploded, his voice a raw, desperate roar that bounced off the quiet elegance of my study walls. He paced erratically, running a hand through his already messy hair. "The company is in free fall. Projects are stalled. Investors are pulling out. It's sabotage, pure, unadulterated sabotage." I merely raised an eyebrow, closing my book and placing it gently on the side table. Sabotage, James, or the natural consequence of certain rash decisions? My voice was calm, conversational, infuriatingly so. He stopped pacing, his eyes blazing. "Don't play coy, Mother. You know what I'm talking about. Chen, Gupta, Rodriguez, Kim, they've vanished. They're not answering calls. They're not coming to meetings. But somehow, critical decisions are still being made outside my authority. Merger votes, funding disbursements, they're all being signed off, but not by me, not by the CEO." He threw his hands up in exasperation. "I know they're operating in the shadows. I know they're reporting to you. This is passive-aggressive retaliation. This is your way of undermining me." He slammed his fist on my antique writing desk, making the porcelain inkwell rattle. "Why, Mother? Why are you doing this? Is this your revenge? Are you trying to prove I'm not good enough to lead? Are you trying to bankrupt Apex just to spite me?" I watched him, listened to his furious rant, the words tumbling out in a torrent of accusation and self-pity. He saw conspiracy, sabotage, passive aggression. He saw everything but the truth. The irony was almost humorous if it weren't so deeply tragic. When he finally ran out of breath, panting, eyes wild, I calmly reached for my unsweetened iced tea as Martha discreetly placed it on the table. I took a slow sip, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify his desperation. "Finished?" I asked, my voice still unnervingly level. He glared, defiance still simmering beneath his exhaustion. "Yes, now explain yourself. Explain this betrayal." "Betrayal?" I repeated, my eyes fixed on his. "You wish to speak of betrayal, James? Let's discuss that, shall we?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping, becoming a chilling murmur that commanded his absolute attention. "Do you truly believe, even for a moment, that Robert Chen, Anya Gupta, Michael Rodriguez, and Sarah Kim, pillars of integrity and dedication, would abandon the company they've helped build simply to undermine you out of petty revenge?" He opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off. "Number think, James. Think about who truly benefits from chaos, from instability, From a young, ambitious, but inexperienced CEO taking the helm and diverting all attention. His brow furrowed, a flicker of genuine confusion, then fear, replacing his anger. "What are you talking about?" "Miller and Davies," I stated, my voice like ice, "didn't side with you because they believed in your dynamic leadership. They sided with you because they believed your inexperience would provide the perfect cover for their long-term corruption. They saw an opportunity, James, and you, in your thirst for power, blindly walked right into their trap." James stared at me, his eyes wide. "What? What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I continued, slowly, deliberately, each word a hammer blow, "that David Miller and Thomas Davies have been systematically embezzling company funds for years. Not small amounts, not petty theft. They've been bleeding Apex dry, funneling millions through a sophisticated network of shell corporations, inflated invoices, and offshore accounts." He recoiled as if struck. "No, that's insane. They're loyal. They're my allies." "They are parasites," I corrected him, my voice devoid of emotion. "They've been gambling on your ambition to create enough noise, enough disruption, that their quiet plunder would go unnoticed. They needed a distraction, James. You were their distraction." I pushed a thin, leather-bound folder across the table towards him. It contained Michael Rodriguez's preliminary findings, compiled with painstaking detail: bank statements, transaction logs, shell company registrations, cross-referenced invoices. The evidence was overwhelming. "This," I said, gesturing to the folder, "is why Robert, Anya, Michael, and Sarah vanished. They didn't abandon Apex. They became the shadow board, my countermeasure. While you were playing CEO with an empty title, they were safeguarding Apex's vital operations, ensuring critical projects moved forward, protecting our core assets, and meticulously gathering proof of Miller and Davies's treachery." James snatched the folder, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned the numbers, the dates, the names of the fictitious companies. The color drained from his face as the sheer scale of the deception became horrifyingly clear. His breathing grew shallow, ragged. He saw the systematic overpayments, the bogus service agreements, the sudden wealth amassed by his allies. "No, this can't be real," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. $50 million, he choked out, his finger trembling on a summary page. "They've stolen $50 million? And counting," I confirmed, my voice chillingly calm. "That's just Michael's conservative estimate of what we've uncovered so far. The full extent of Miller and Davies's fraud, perpetrated under the very nose of the dynamic leadership they so eagerly endorsed, is likely far greater. They used your inexperience as their shield, your ambition as their cloak." He dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the desk. He slumped back in his chair, utterly reeling, his earlier fury replaced by a profound, desolate shock. The reality of it, the colossal betrayal by the very people he had brought into his inner circle, the sheer magnitude of the fraud that had transpired under his nascent leadership seemed to crush him. He wasn't just betrayed, he was used. He was a pawn. They, they set me up," he murmured, his voice hollow, desolate. "They manipulated me." "Indeed," I agreed, allowing the silence to settle around his broken admission. "They saw an opportunity in your eagerness to take over. They stoked your impatience, whispered in your ear about my stifling ways, knowing that a rapid, chaotic transition would create the perfect diversion for their schemes. You thought you were staging a coup, James, but you were merely providing cover for a far more insidious one." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, for the first time in years. The arrogance was gone. The ambition was dimmed, replaced by a raw vulnerability, a dawning understanding of his own naivety, his terrible misjudgment. The slap he'd received from his father, the one that broke my heart, was nothing compared to the slap of this reality. He hadn't just been outmaneuvered, he had been utterly outclassed by both his enemies and his own mother. My silence invited his reflection. I didn't gloat. I didn't admonish further. The truth in this moment was far more potent than any lecture. He was seeing the true face of corporate ruthlessness, the dark underbelly of power, not from a textbook, but from the wreckage of his own ambition. And he was seeing, for the first time, the wisdom in my cautious, strategic approach, the reason I held the reins so tightly. I wasn't guarding my power, I was guarding Apex. The battle had shifted. It was no longer Beth versus James. It was Beth and James, potentially, against a far greater threat. And the cost of his lesson had been a staggering $50 million and counting. The true fight for Apex, the fight for its soul, had only just begun. And for the first time, James seemed ready to truly understand what was at stake. The silence in my study, thick with the weight of James's revelation, finally broke with a choked sob from my son. He wasn't crying for himself, not entirely, but for the company he had almost unwittingly destroyed, for the magnitude of the betrayal he had been blind to. He looked at me, not with defiance, but with a desperate plea for guidance. "Mother," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "what do we do?" It was the first time in years he had asked for my help without a trace of condescension or impatience. It was the first time he had truly seen the chasm between ambition and wisdom. "What we do, James," I said, my voice firm, "is what we always do at Apex. We fix it." The following weeks were a blur of intense, surgical precision. The shadow board emerged from the darkness. Robert Chen, Anya Gupta, Michael Rodriguez, and Sarah Kim stepped back into their official roles, their reappearance sending a ripple of confusion, then relief, through the company. The narrative crafted for public consumption was simple, a temporary leadership adjustment to root out internal malfeasance. The truth that James had been a puppet and I the puppeteer remained strictly within our trusted circle. My first order of business was to bring Miller and Davies to justice. Michael Rodriguez, with his meticulous documentation of their $50 million fraud, had built an airtight case. We worked closely with federal prosecutors and the SEC. The arrests were swift and public, sending shockwaves through the industry. The headlines screamed, "Apex executives arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme." The shame was immense, but it was a necessary cleansing. Their greed had nearly capsized my ship, but their downfall served as a powerful public testament to Apex's commitment to integrity, even if the deeper family drama remained hidden. With the immediate threat neutralized, the real work began, correcting the chaos James had inadvertently unleashed. It was like performing intricate surgery on a living, breathing organism. I stepped back into my role, not as CEO, but as a crisis manager, a strategic consultant for my son. I let James take the public lead, fronting press conferences, addressing shareholders, taking responsibility. It was a humbling experience for him, forcing him to confront the real consequences of his rash decisions. I guided him from the sidelines, advising on damage control, investor relations, and morale-boosting initiatives. "James," I'd tell him during our late-night strategy sessions, "leadership isn't just about making bold moves. It's about stability. It's about trust. And right now, trust is our most valuable and fragile asset." He listened, truly listened. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet humility. He saw the complexities, the intricate web of relationships, the delicate balance of market forces and human elements that I had mastered over decades. He learned to rebuild broken project teams, to mend alienated client relationships, to reassure nervous investors. He learned to delegate, to trust, and most importantly, to listen to the experienced voices around him, the very voices he had once dismissed. The company slowly began to stabilize. Revenue forecasts, though still recovering, showed signs of positive traction. Investor confidence, buoyed by the decisive action against the corrupt executives and James's visible efforts to right the ship, slowly returned. Apex, resilient as ever, began to claw its way back. As the immediate crisis subsided, I genuinely started to enjoy my newfound freedom. The early morning phone calls became less frequent. The pressure to make every single decision lifted. I could choose my battles, offer advice when it was truly needed, but let James bear the full weight of daily leadership. It was a transition that was both liberating for me and transformative for him. I went back to tending my roses, reading my books, enjoying the quiet life at the cabin. But now, my peace was deeper, more profound. It wasn't just the absence of corporate stress. It was the satisfaction of seeing my son grow, not just into a leader, but into a man of wisdom and integrity. Over time, James, humbled and profoundly wiser, proved his mettle. He learned the true complexities of leadership the hard way, through fire and failure. He learned that power is earned through wisdom and integrity, not ambition alone. He cultivated patience, developed empathy, and understood that true strength lay in building alliances, not in alienating those who could help him. He began to value the insights of Robert, Anya, Michael, and Sarah, not just as subordinates, but as trusted advisors. He even started calling me for advice, not just on corporate strategy, but on life, on balancing ambition with humanity. Our mother-son relationship, once strained by his ambition, slowly healed, transforming into one of mutual respect and genuine affection. One crisp autumn morning, a year after the boardroom coup, James came to the cabin. He looked different, still sharp, still ambitious, but his eyes held a new depth, a calm authority. He sat across from me, sipping his sweetened iced tea, and looked out at the lake. "Mother," he began, his voice steady, "Apex is back on track. We've hit our Q4 targets. Project Chimera is exceeding expectations. Investor relations are stronger than ever." I smiled. "I've been following the reports, James. You've done good work." He nodded. "But it's not just the numbers, Mother. I understand it now. I understand what you tried to teach me all those years. It's about the people. It's about trust. It's about knowing when to lead from the front and when to listen from behind. And it's about protecting what you've built, not just for personal gain, but for everyone who believes in it." He paused, then looked me squarely in the eye. "Thank you for letting me fail, for letting me learn, for saving me from myself, and for saving Apex." It was the apology I hadn't known I needed, spoken not with words of remorse alone, but with the quiet confidence of a leader who had truly earned his stripes. "You've earned it, James," I said, a warmth spreading through my chest. "You've truly earned it." And in that moment, I knew I was ready. A few months later, at the annual shareholders meeting, I stood on the stage beside James. The applause for him was thunderous, genuine. He had led Apex through its darkest hour and brought it back stronger. I took the microphone, and with a serene smile, I announced my official permanent retirement. "Today," I declared, my voice resonating with decades of experience, "I am truly passing the torch, not because I am old, but because the leader who stands beside me has proven, through fire and resilience, that he is ready. James Hayes has earned his place not just through ambition, but through wisdom, integrity, and a profound understanding of what true leadership entails. I now enjoy my retirement fully. My days are filled with the quiet rhythms of nature, with cultivating my garden, with reading the classics, with traveling to places I'd only ever dreamed of seeing. I occasionally consult for Apex, a wise elder statesman on the board, but the day-to-day decisions, the immense weight of responsibility, is James's, and I watch him, confident in his abilities, proud of the man he has become. The story's message became clear, not just for James, but for anyone who chooses to listen. Power is earned through wisdom and integrity, not ambition alone. True leadership involves understanding not just the market's algorithms, but the complex, often unpredictable, dynamics of the people within your organization. And sometimes, the most profound lessons are learned when everything falls apart, forcing growth, humility, and the ultimate realization that the most valuable asset in any empire is not wealth or power, but unwavering trust and authentic character. The path to true succession isn't about simply taking over, it's about proving yourself worthy of the legacy you inherit and ultimately building your own. And that brings Beth's remarkable journey to a close. We truly hope you enjoyed this tale of corporate intrigue, family dynamics, and the ultimate triumph of wisdom. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like it, subscribe for more engaging narratives, and comment below with your thoughts. Your feedback means the world to us, and we cherish every single comment and suggestion. Thank you for being with us on Beth's journey, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.